The city of Crestfall never truly slept. Even before sunrise, the streets were already filled with the sounds of buses, motorcycles, and workers rushing to their jobs. Towering above the busy district stood the sleek glass headquarters of Halcyon Retail Group, one of the fastest-growing retail corporations in the country. Thousands of employees worked under its name, and its stores could be found in almost every major city. At the very top floor of the building, inside a quiet office with wide windows overlooking the skyline, sat the man responsible for the entire empire. His name was Calum Veermont. At 38 years old, Calum was already considered one of the most successful CEOs in the industry. Business magazines constantly featured his face on their covers. Analysts praised his intelligence and discipline. Investors trusted him with billions of dollars. To the outside world, he looked like a man who had everything perfectly under control. But that morning, as the sun slowly rose behind the tall buildings, Calum sat silently in his chair, staring at a thick folder lying on his desk. Inside that folder were reports. Not financial reports, not market forecasts. They were complaints, customer complaints, former employee testimonies, anonymous letters sent directly to the company headquarters. He had spent the entire night reading them. Some described rude staff in several branches. Others talked about employees ignoring customers while scrolling on their phones. There were even stories about janitors being treated poorly by supervisors. One letter stood out to him the most. The handwriting was messy, almost as if written in frustration. It said that the employees inside one of Halcyon's biggest branches had become arrogant, believing their positions made them superior to others. According to the letter, workers in lower positions like cleaners and maintenance staff were constantly humiliated. Calum slowly closed the folder. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. Across the desk stood his longtime executive assistant, Thalissa Rivenhart, who had been silently waiting while he finished reading. "Sir," she said carefully, "these complaints have already been forwarded to regional managers. They promised to investigate." Calum let out a quiet breath. "That's exactly the problem," he replied. Thalissa frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Calum turned his chair toward the large window, watching the city below. "Managers investigate managers. Supervisors protect supervisors. Reports get cleaned before they reach me. What I receive are polished summaries, not the truth." For a moment, the office fell silent. Thalissa had worked with him for 8 years, and she knew that when Calum spoke in that calm tone, it usually meant he had already made a decision. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. Calum turned back toward her, his sharp gray eyes now steady. "I want to see everything myself." Thalissa blinked in confusion. "You're the CEO of a multi-billion company. You can't just walk into one of your own branches without security." "I'm not going as the CEO." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Thalissa stared at him. "Then who will you go as?" Calum reached for a small piece of paper on his desk. He had written a name on it earlier that morning, Orion Vale. He slid the paper toward her. "I'll be applying as a janitor." For a few seconds, Thalissa thought he was joking, but Calum's expression remained completely serious. "Sir, that's dangerous," she said carefully. "What if someone recognizes you?" "They won't." Calum had already thought through everything. His usual tailored suits would be replaced with cheap uniforms. His hair would be trimmed differently. Even his posture would change. He had studied how maintenance workers carried themselves, how they spoke, how they avoided drawing attention. To the employees inside the branch, he would simply be another invisible worker, another janitor. "No one notices the janitor," Caleb said quietly. "They walk past them every day without even looking." Thalassa slowly exhaled. "And how long do you plan to do this?" "A few weeks, maybe longer if necessary." "And the board of directors?" "I'll tell them I'm working on a confidential operational project." She crossed her arms, still uneasy. "And what exactly are you hoping to find?" Caleb looked once again at the thick folder of complaints. "The truth," he said. He stood up from his chair and walked toward the window again. Down below, employees were already entering the building, rushing toward their offices to start another day of work. Most of them had no idea that the man responsible for the entire company was standing right above them. And very soon, he would be standing beside them, not as their CEO, but as the janitor they wouldn't even bother to notice. Caleb Vermont watched the busy street below and spoke quietly, almost to himself. If a company loses its humanity, no amount of profit can save it. Within a few days, the preparations would begin, and somewhere inside one of Halcyon Retail's busiest branches, a quiet janitor named Orion Vale would soon start his first day of work. No one inside that building would realize that the man pushing the cleaning cart was actually the billionaire CEO of the entire company. But before long, their true behavior would reveal everything. 3 days later, the Halcyon retail branch in the district of Varela opened its doors just like any ordinary morning. Employees arrived one by one, some carrying coffee cups, others still half awake as they clocked in for the day. The building itself was one of the company's busiest locations, a massive retail complex filled with customers from morning until late evening. Most of the employees believed it was going to be just another routine day. None of them noticed the quiet man entering through the service entrance at the back of the building. He wore a simple gray maintenance uniform with the name tag Orion Vale stitched above the pocket. His once perfectly styled hair was now cut shorter and slightly uneven, and his posture had changed. Instead of the confident stance of a powerful executive, he moved with the calm, almost invisible presence of someone used to being ignored. The man pushing the cleaning cart into the hallway was none other than Caleb Vermont. But inside this building, no one knew that. A middle-aged maintenance supervisor handed him a mop and a small set of keys without even looking directly at his face. "You're the new guy?" the supervisor muttered while checking a clipboard. "Yes, sir," Orion replied calmly. "Bathrooms first, then hallway floors. Trash collection every 2 hours. Don't get in the way of the sales staff." The instructions were quick and dismissive. The supervisor barely waited for a response before walking away. Orion simply nodded and pushed the cleaning cart toward the first hallway. From the very beginning, he began observing everything. The store was already filling with customers. Music played softly through the speakers, and the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe spread through the air. From the outside, the place looked polished and efficient, but it did not take long before Orion began noticing small things. As he quietly mopped the tile floor near the electronics section, 2 sales associates stood behind the counter chatting while a customer waited awkwardly in front of them. The customer, an older man holding a product box, cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me, can someone help me with this item?" One of the employees sighed loudly before finally stepping forward. "You could have just read the instructions on the box," the employee said, with clear irritation. The old man looked embarrassed. Orion continued mopping, pretending not to hear anything, while mentally taking note of the interaction. A few minutes later, someone threw an empty coffee cup in a trash bin near him. The cup missed and rolled across the floor. The employee who had thrown it didn't even bother looking back. Without saying a word, Orion walked over and picked it up. Another group of workers passed by him shortly after. One of them glanced briefly at the cleaning cart. "Hey, janitor," the man said casually while pointing to a small puddle near the entrance. "You missed a spot over there." The tone wasn't polite. It wasn't even a request. It was an order. Orion simply nodded. "I'll take care of it." As the morning continued, the same pattern repeated again and again. Employees walked by him without acknowledgement. Some dropped trash near him as if it was his responsibility to immediately clean it. Others complained loudly about their shifts while doing the bare minimum of work. One young cashier leaned against the counter while scrolling through her phone. "Why is this place so busy today?" she complained to her coworker. "I swear these customers think we're robots." Meanwhile, a customer waited quietly in line. Orion moved through the store, pushing his cleaning cart while silently observing everything around him. Inside his mind, he compared what he was seeing to the reports he had read days earlier. Unfortunately, the complaints were not exaggerated. If anything, they were understated. As he began cleaning the hallway leading to the storage rooms, he overheard two employees speaking near the door. "I heard corporate might send someone to inspect the branches soon," one of them said. The other laughed. "They say that every year. Nothing ever happens." They both chuckled and walked away. Orion continued mopping slowly, invisible, ignored, just as he had expected. But as he turned the corner toward the staff lounge, he noticed something that made him pause slightly. A younger employee was walking toward him carrying a box of supplies. Unlike the others, the young man stopped when he saw Orion pushing the heavy cleaning cart. "Hey," the employee said politely, "that cart looks pretty heavy. Want me to hold the door for you?" For the first time that morning, someone had spoken to him with genuine respect. Orion looked at the young man for a brief moment before giving a small nod. "Thank you." The young employee smiled slightly and held the door open while Orion pushed the cart through. "No problem," the man replied. "First day here?" "Yes." "Well, welcome to Halcyon," the employee said. "My name's Elric Dantor." Orion nodded once again. "Orion Vale." Elric gave a friendly wave before heading down the hallway. As the young man disappeared around the corner, Orion quietly continued pushing the cart. In the middle of a workplace filled with arrogance and indifference, one person had shown simple kindness, and that small moment did not go unnoticed. But the day was far from over, because before long, Orion would begin witnessing something far worse than simple rudeness. What he was about to see would prove just how deep the problem inside his company truly went. The next few days passed quietly for Orion Vale, at least on the surface. He continued performing his duties like any ordinary janitor inside the Halcyon branch in Virella. Every morning, he arrived early through the service entrance, pushed his cleaning cart through the long hallways, and spent hours wiping floors, emptying trash bins and scrubbing the restrooms. But behind his calm expression, Calum Viremont was carefully observing everything. The pattern of behavior among the employees had become clearer to him with each passing day. Most workers barely acknowledged the maintenance staff. Some ignored them completely, as if janitors were invisible pieces of furniture placed around the building. Occasionally, someone would throw trash toward a bin without bothering to aim properly, leaving the mess for someone else to clean. When Orion would quietly pick up the trash, no one thanked him. What disturbed him most was the attitude of a certain supervisor who controlled the sales floor. His name was Roderick Halvern. Roderick was a tall man in his early 40s who wore expensive watches and walked through the store with a constant expression of impatience. His voice carried across the sales floor whenever he gave orders, and most employees obeyed him quickly out of fear rather than respect. From the very beginning, Orion noticed how Roderick treated the lower staff. One afternoon, while Orion was quietly wiping the floor near the clothing section, a loud voice echoed across the area. "Who cleaned this place earlier?" Several employees froze as Roderick stormed toward them. A spilled drink had formed a sticky puddle on the tile floor. Roderick's eyes quickly landed on Orion, who was standing a few meters away with a mop. "You," Roderick barked while pointing directly at him. "Janitor." Orion calmly walked closer. "Yes, sir." Roderick crossed his arms and looked down at the puddle. "This mess should have been cleaned already." Orion glanced at the spill. It was still fresh. Someone had clearly dropped it only seconds ago. "I just arrived in this section. I'll take care of it now." But Roderick had already decided to make a scene. "Incompetent," he muttered loud enough for nearby employees and customers to hear. Several workers nearby turned their heads. "This is exactly why maintenance staff are useless. You people get paid to do one job, and you still can't do it properly." Orion remained silent. Inside his mind, Calum carefully watched how the others reacted. Some employees looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched with curiosity. And a few even smiled quietly. Roderick kicked the empty plastic cup toward Orion's feet. "Clean it," he ordered. Without saying anything, Orion bent down, picked up the cup, and began wiping the floor. But Roderick wasn't finished. He turned toward a group of employees standing nearby. "Look at this," he said loudly. "This is what happens when companies hire anyone with a pulse." A few of the workers laughed. The sound echoed slightly through the section. Customers nearby looked confused, but quickly continued shopping. Orion slowly continued cleaning the spill. He did not argue. He did not react. But inside his mind, he carefully remembered every word. Roderick leaned closer and lowered his voice slightly, though it was still loud enough for others to hear. "Next time, do your job properly, or I'll have you replaced by someone who actually knows how to clean." Orion finished wiping the floor and calmly stood up. "Yes, sir." Roderick scoffed and walked away, shaking his head as if he had just dealt with something annoying. Several employees nearby began whispering among themselves. One of them chuckled quietly. Another simply shrugged and returned to work. To them, it was just another ordinary moment inside the store. But for Calum Viremont, it revealed something important. This was not just occasional disrespect. This was a culture where people in power believed they could humiliate others simply because of their position. Later that afternoon, Orion pushed his cleaning cart toward the storage hallway. As he turned the corner, he heard familiar footsteps behind him. "Hey!" He turned slightly. It was Elric Danter, the young employee who'd helped him earlier in the week. Elric glanced down the hallway to make sure no supervisors were nearby. "Don't mind Roderick. He talks like that to everyone he thinks is below him." Orion looked at him calmly. "That's not very professional." Elric let out a small laugh. "You're telling me half the staff here hates him, but nobody says anything." "Why not?" Elric shrugged. "He's close to upper management. Complaints disappear before they reach anyone important." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elric looked slightly embarrassed before speaking again. "Still, sorry you had to deal with that." Orion gave a small nod. "It's all right." Elric hesitated before speaking again. "If you ever need help carrying supplies or something, just let me know." "Thank you." Elric gave a quick wave before heading back toward the sales floor. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Orion slowly resumed pushing the cleaning cart. In the middle of a workplace filled with arrogance, there was still someone willing to stand up for what was right. But Calum knew something else as well. The humiliation he experienced earlier was only the beginning, because the deeper he looked into this branch, the more serious the problems would become. The following days inside the Halcyon branch continued much the same way for Orion Vale. Every morning he arrived early, long before most employees began their shifts. The quiet hours before opening allowed him to move through the store unnoticed while cleaning the polished floors and emptying the overflowing trash bins left from the night before. But once the store opened and employees filled the building, the atmosphere always changed. The noise returned, conversations grew louder, complaints echoed through the sales floor, and most of the staff continued to treat the janitor the same way they always had, as if he did not exist. Orion pushed his cleaning cart down the central aisle one afternoon while customers browsed the shelves. A group of employees stood near the electronics section laughing about something on one of their phones. When one of them finished drinking a bottle of soda, he casually dropped the empty bottle into a nearby bin. The bottle bounced off the rim and rolled across the floor. None of them bothered to pick it up. They simply continued talking. Without saying anything, Orion walked over, picked up the bottle, and placed it properly inside the trash bin. None of them acknowledged him. Moments like that had become routine, but not everyone inside the store behaved the same way. Later that day, Orion entered the storage corridor behind the sales floor to collect discarded boxes. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, filled with stacked delivery crates waiting to be sorted. As he pushed the cleaning cart toward the back room, the heavy storage door suddenly swung open. A heavy stack of supply boxes nearly collided with him. "Whoa, sorry." The voice belongs to Elric Dantor. The young employee was struggling to balance several boxes in his arms. Orion quickly stepped forward and steadied the stack before it could fall. Elric let out a relieved breath. "Thanks," he said with a small smile. "I thought those were about to crush me." Orion gently lowered the boxes onto a nearby table. "You should ask someone to help with that." Elric laughed quietly. "If I wait for help around here, I'll still be standing here tomorrow." He wiped his hands on his uniform before glancing at the cleaning cart. "You've been working nonstop all week. They're giving you the worst sections." Orion shrugged slightly. "It's part of the job." Elric leaned against the wall for a moment, catching his breath. I used to work maintenance back when I was in school, so I know how people treat janitors. Orion looked at him with quiet curiosity. And how did they treat you? Elric gave a small smile that carried a hint of sadness, like I didn't belong in the same building. The hallway fell quiet for a moment. Then Elric pushed himself off the wall. Anyway, he said, brushing dust from his hands, if anyone gives you trouble, just ignore them. People here think job titles make them important. Orion studied the young man carefully. Unlike the others, Elric spoke without arrogance. There was no mockery in his voice, no condescension, just simple honesty. Why do you work here? Orion asked. Elric scratched the back of his neck. Honestly, I need the job. He laughed lightly. My dad runs a small repair shop back home. Business isn't always good, so I help send money whenever I can. Orion nodded slowly. That's admirable. Elric shrugged. It's just family. The young employee then glanced toward the sales floor entrance. I should get back before Roderick starts yelling again. He began lifting the boxes once more, but before leaving, he paused. Hey, Elric said, if anyone treats you badly again, don't take it personally. Orion looked at him calmly. I won't. Elric gave a small wave and carried the boxes down the hallway. As the young man disappeared around the corner, Orion remained standing beside the cleaning cart. Inside his mind, Calum carefully reflected on the conversation. In a building filled with arrogance, one employee had chosen kindness. One employee had shown respect to someone he believed was nothing more than a janitor. That single detail mattered more than most people would realize. Later that evening, while the store was closing, Orion slowly pushed the cleaning cart across the quiet floor. Employees clocked out one by one, eager to leave after a long day. As he wiped the final section near the entrance, he noticed Elric once again. The young employee had stayed behind to help a cashier organize some inventory. Neither of them were required to stay late, but they did it anyway. Orion watched silently for a moment. Then he returned to mopping the floor. Because the more time he spent inside this building, the more he began to understand something important. The culture of a workplace was not defined only by the people in power. It was also shaped by the quiet individuals who chose to act with integrity even when no one was watching. But even as Calum recognized that small spark of goodness inside the company, he also knew something else. What he had witnessed so far was only the surface. Soon he would begin discovering problems far more serious than rude behavior and arrogant supervisors. And those discoveries would reveal just how deeply the company had begun to rot from within. By the end of the second week, Orion Vale had already memorized the daily rhythm of the Halcyon branch in Varela. The store came alive every morning with the noise of customers and employees preparing for another busy day. Sales counters lit up, registers beeped constantly, and employees moved quickly between aisles trying to keep up with the flow of shoppers. To most people, the branch looked like a successful and well-managed store. But Callum Viremont had begun seeing things others never noticed. Small details, strange patterns, unusual conversations that didn't match the company policies he himself had built over the years. That afternoon, Orion was assigned to clean the hallway near the administrative offices behind the sales floor. It was a quieter section of the building where supervisors and managers worked on paperwork and inventory reports. Employees rarely paid attention to the janitor working there, which made it the perfect place to observe. Orion slowly pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, mopping the floor with slow, steady movements. The corridor was empty, except for the faint sound of voices coming from one of the offices ahead. The office door was slightly open. two men was speaking inside. Orion continued mopping the floor nearby, keeping his head down while quietly listening. One of the voices belonged to Roderick Halvern. Even without seeing him, Orion could recognize the supervisor's impatient tone. "This month's numbers don't look good," Roderick muttered. Another voice responded. It sounded older and calmer. "That's why we adjust the report before sending it to headquarters." Orion's hand paused briefly on the mop handle. He kept his posture relaxed and continued mopping slowly. Roderick lowered his voice slightly. "Are you sure the system won't flag it?" The second man chuckled softly. "Relax, we've been doing this for years." Orion moved closer to the office door, pretending to wipe the wall panels. Inside the office, the two men stood beside a desk covered with printed sales reports. The older man was the branch operations manager, Silas Vantrell. "We just shift the inventory numbers. Some missing items get marked as damaged goods. Corporate never questions it." Roderick frowned while flipping through the papers. "But what about the extra stock we sold off? That money doesn't go through the system." Silas tapped a folder on the desk. "We divided among the management team." Orion kept his eyes on the floor, but every word was carefully recorded in his mind. For several seconds, neither man noticed the janitor working just outside the door. Then Roderick spoke again. "I still don't like it," he said. "If someone audits the branch—" Silas waved his hand dismissively. "No one will audit anything. Corporate trusts the reports we send." Orion slowly pushed the mop across the floor again. Inside Callum's mind, Callum felt a quiet surge of anger. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was corruption. His company had strict financial oversight systems. Inventory reports were supposed to be verified through multiple channels. But if the managers themselves were manipulating the data before sending it forward, then the system would never detect the fraud. Silas closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Besides," he added, "upper management never visits this branch anyway." Roderick laughed quietly. "Exactly." Orion finished mopping the hallway and moved the cleaning cart slowly past the office. Neither man paid attention to him. To them, he was just another janitor cleaning the floor. Invisible. Once you turned the corner, Orion pushed the cart toward the storage area. His expression remained calm, but his mind was working rapidly. For the first time since arriving at the branch, Callum had confirmed something far more serious than simple rude employees. Managers were stealing from the company. They were manipulating reports. They were hiding profits that should have belonged to the business and its shareholders. And they believed no one would ever find out. Later that evening, while collecting trash bins behind the store, Orion spotted Elric Dantor organizing inventory crates near the loading dock. Elric wiped sweat from his forehead when he finished stacking the last box. "Long day?" he asked when he noticed Orion approaching. Orion nodded slightly. "Yes." Elric glanced toward the administrative offices across the hallway. "You were cleaning near the manager's section earlier, right?" "Yes." Elric hesitated before speaking again. "Be careful around them." Orion looked at him calmly. "Why do you say that?" Elric lowered his voice. "Let's just say the managers here don't like people asking too many questions." Orion studied the young employee for a moment. "You've noticed things too?" Elric shrugged. "Nothing I can prove." He kicked a small piece of cardboard aside. "But sometimes the inventory numbers don't match what we actually receive." Orion nodded slowly. The young man had sharp instincts, but unlike the managers, Elric had chosen not to exploit the situation. Instead, he simply continued doing his work honestly. As the evening shift ended and employees began leaving the building, Orion quietly finished his tasks near the loading dock. The sky outside had already turned dark. Customers were gone, the store was silent. But inside Callum's mind, one realization had become perfectly clear. The problems inside this branch ran much deeper than simple disrespect. Corruption had taken root, and the people responsible believed they were untouchable. They had no idea that the quiet janitor cleaning their floors was actually the billionaire CEO of the entire company. And soon, their carefully built lies would begin to collapse. The following morning began like any other day inside the Halcyon branch in Varela. Customers moved through the wide aisles. Cash registers chimed steadily, and employees hurried from one section to another, trying to keep up with the growing crowd. To most people, the store looked lively and productive, but beneath the surface, tension had slowly begun building inside the building. Orion Vale arrived early as usual and started his routine. He pushed the cleaning cart across the polished floors, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces before the rush of customers filled the store. As he worked quietly near the beverage section, he noticed something familiar. Roderick Halvern was already walking across the sales floor with his usual sharp expression, inspecting employees like a commander checking his troops. The supervisor always seemed irritated, as if the entire world was constantly disappointing him. Orion continued mopping the floor, keeping his head down while observing the scene. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the nearby aisle. A glass bottle had slipped from a customer's shopping basket and shattered on the tile floor. The dark liquid quickly spread across the aisle while shards of glass scattered everywhere. Customers stepped back in surprise. A cashier quickly pressed a button to call for assistance. Roderick turned his head toward the sound and immediately spotted Orion standing nearby with his mop. His voice boomed across the aisle. "You!" Orion calmly walked closer. "Yes, sir?" Roderick pointed angrily at the mess. "Why is this still here?" Orion looked at the broken bottle. The spill had happened only seconds ago. "I just arrived," he said calmly. "I'll clean it immediately." But Roderick was already in one of his familiar moods. "Incompetent," he muttered loudly. Several employees nearby turned to watch. "You janitors are supposed to keep the floor clean at all times," Roderick continued. Orion quietly placed a caution sign on the floor and began preparing the mop. The supervisor suddenly kicked a nearby plastic cleaning bucket toward him. The bucket slid across the floor and slammed into the cart with a loud clang. "You see this mess?" Roderick snapped. "That's your responsibility." Some employees nearby chuckled awkwardly. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Orion continued preparing the mop without reacting. Inside his mind, Calum Veramont watched every detail carefully. This was no longer just simple arrogance. Roderick was deliberately humiliating someone he believed had no power to fight back. The supervisor leaned closer and spoke loud enough for the surrounding employees to hear. "If you can't even handle something this simple, I'll replace you with someone who can actually do the job." The words echoed across the aisle. At that moment, another voice suddenly spoke up. "That's not fair." The words surprised everyone nearby. Roderick turned sharply. "What did you say?" Elric walked closer, his expression calm but determined. "I said that's not fair," he repeated. He pointed toward the broken bottle on the floor. "That just happened. You know it wasn't his fault." The surrounding employees froze. No one ever challenged Roderick openly. The supervisor's face slowly darkened. "Are you defending a janitor?" he asked coldly. Elric didn't step back. I'm defending someone who didn't do anything wrong." For a moment, the entire aisle fell silent. Customers nearby watched the scene with curiosity. Roderick crossed his arms. "Maybe you've forgotten who your supervisor is." Elric shook his head slightly. "No, sir, I haven't." "Then remember your place." The threat hung heavily in the air, but Elric remained calm. "My place is doing my job properly," he replied. "And part of that means not blaming people for things they didn't do." Roderick stared at him for several seconds. The tension in the aisle was almost unbearable. Finally, the supervisor scoffed. "Fine," he said coldly. He pointed at Elric. "If you care so much, you clean it." Before he could pick up the mop, Orion gently placed a hand on the cleaning cart. "It's all right," he said quietly. He then began cleaning the broken glass and spilled liquid with steady movements. The entire process took less than a minute. Roderick shook his head in annoyance. "You're both wasting time," he muttered, before turning and walking away. The employees nearby slowly returned to their work. Customers resumed shopping. The moment passed like any other incident in a busy store. But for Calum Veramont, the moment had revealed something important. As Orion finished cleaning the floor, Elric helped collect the last pieces of broken glass. "You didn't have to do that," Orion said quietly. Elric shrugged. "Someone had to." He glanced toward the direction Roderick had walked. "That guy's been pushing people around for years." Orion looked at him carefully. "And you're not afraid of losing your job?" Elric gave a small smile. "I need this job," he admitted. "But if keeping it means letting someone bully others, then maybe it's not worth it." Orion slowly nodded. Inside his mind, Calum Veramont felt something close to respect. In a workplace where most people stayed silent to protect themselves, one young employee had chosen to stand up for someone else. But Calum also knew something else. The situation inside this branch was now reaching its breaking point, because very soon the entire staff would receive news that would send shockwaves through the building. A message from headquarters. The CEO himself would be visiting the branch, and none of them had any idea that he had already been watching them the entire time. The next morning, inside the Halcyon branch felt different, though at first no one could explain why. Employees arrived earlier than usual, whispering among themselves while preparing the store for the day. The usual relaxed chatter had been replaced by a strange tension that hung in the air like a coming storm. Orion Vale pushed his cleaning cart through the front hallway as he always did, quietly wiping down the glass panels near the entrance. From the outside, he appeared to be doing the same routine work he had been doing for the past 2 weeks. But the moment he stepped deeper into the store, he immediately noticed the difference. Employees were moving faster. Shelves were being rearranged with unusual urgency. The cashier counters were being wiped repeatedly, as if someone important was about to inspect every corner of the place. Near the center of the sales floor, several staff members had gathered around a bulletin board where a printed notice had just been posted. One of the employees read it out loud. "Attention all staff. Corporate headquarters has announced that the CEO of Halcyon Retail Group will be conducting an official visit to the Varela branch later this week." The moment the words were spoken, the small crowd exploded into murmurs. The CEO himself? Why here? I thought he never visits branches. Someone else stepped closer to read the notice again. It says the visit is for operational inspection and employee evaluation. The tension grew immediately. Orion continued pushing his cart slowly while listening. A few steps away, Roderick Halvern suddenly appeared, his face already filled with irritation. "What's all this standing around?" he barked. The employees quickly stepped back from the bulletin board. "Did you all forget you have jobs to do?" One of the workers nervously pointed at the notice. "Sir, the CEO is coming." Roderick snatched the paper from the board and read it quickly. His expression shifted from annoyance to something closer to concern. "The CEO is visiting this branch?" he muttered. For a moment, even he seemed surprised. Then he straightened his posture and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "All right, listen carefully." Employees gathered around him. "If the CEO is coming here, this store needs to look perfect." His voice grew sharper. "I don't want to see a single misplaced item, no lazy employees standing around. Everything must look professional." He pointed toward the shelves. "Reorganize the displays." Then toward the cash registers. "Make sure the counters are spotless." His eyes then swept across the floor until they landed briefly on Orion. "And maintenance staff better keep this place cleaner than a hospital." Without another word, Roderick turned and marched toward the administrative offices. The employees immediately scattered to begin preparing the store. Orion quietly resumed mopping the floor. But inside his mind, Kalium Viramont felt a calm sense of confirmation. The moment people heard the CEO was coming, their behavior changed instantly. Workers who normally ignored customers were suddenly smiling and greeting them politely. Employees who had spent hours chatting now rushed to rearrange products. Even supervisors were inspecting shelves personally, something they rarely did before. Later that afternoon, Orion pushed his cart into the staff break room. Inside, several employees were already discussing the news. "I heard the CEO is extremely strict," one cashier whispered. "They say he built the company from almost nothing." Another worker leaned closer. "My cousin works at another branch. She said the CEO once fired 3 managers on the spot during an inspection." The group exchanged nervous looks. Across the room, Elric Dantor sat quietly at the table eating a simple lunch. When he noticed Orion entering, he gave a small nod. "Looks like things are about to get interesting," Elric said. Orion placed his cleaning supplies beside the door. "What do you think about the visit?" he asked calmly. Elric shrugged. "If the CEO is serious about fixing things, it might be good for this place." He lowered his voice slightly. "Maybe someone will finally notice what's been happening around here." Orion looked at him carefully. "And what exactly do you think has been happening?" Elric hesitated. He glanced around the room to make sure no supervisors were nearby. Then he spoke quietly. "Some people here think they're untouchable." Orion nodded slowly. "That's an interesting observation." Elric smiled slightly. "Well, if the CEO really shows up, we'll see who's untouchable." A few days later, the entire branch had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Employees arrived early every morning to clean their sections. Managers double-checked every report. Even Roderick Halvern had begun speaking more politely to customers. But none of them realized something important. The CEO they were preparing to impress had already been watching everything. Every careless comment, every act of arrogance, every moment of kindness. As Orion quietly wiped the glass entrance doors that evening, he watched employees rushing around trying to prepare for the visit. They were trying to show a version of the store that had never truly existed. And very soon, they would learn something shocking. The man they had ignored, the janitor they had mocked, the worker they believed had no importance at all, was actually the billionaire CEO of the entire company. and the moment of truth was approaching faster than any of them realized. The day of the CEO's visit finally arrived, and the entire Halcyon branch in Varela had never looked more polished. From the moment the doors opened that morning, every employee moved with unusual discipline. Shelves were perfectly aligned, product displays were spotless, and every counter had been wiped repeatedly until it shined under the bright store lights. Even the atmosphere felt different. Employees who once ignored customers now greeted them with forced smiles. Conversations were quieter. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the same moment, the arrival of the CEO. Near the administrative offices, supervisors and managers gathered in a small conference room, speaking in low voices while reviewing documents one last time. Roderick Halvern stood near the head of the table, straightening his tie while glancing nervously at the door. "I want everything perfect," he said firmly. "If the CEO finds even one problem in this branch, it reflects on all of us." Silas Vantrell, the operations manager, nodded while adjusting a stack of reports. "We've already fixed the numbers," Silas said quietly. "Everything in the system matches the reports." Roderick exhaled slowly. "Good." Outside the office, the employees on the sales floor were also preparing. Some stood near the entrance waiting for the arrival of corporate representatives. Others continued organizing displays, pretending to remain busy while secretly watching the front doors. Among them, Elric Dantor was adjusting a shelf of electronics accessories. He looked around the store, noticing how strangely everyone was behaving. It almost felt like a different workplace. A few meters away, Orion Vale was quietly wiping the glass panels beside the entrance doors. His movements were slow and steady, just like any other morning. To the employees passing by, he was nothing more than the janitor doing his job. But inside his mind, Calum Viermont knew the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Outside the building, a black sedan slowly pulled into the parking area reserved for executives. Several employees immediately noticed it through the glass windows. "Is that them?" someone whispered. A few seconds later, the store manager rushed toward the entrance. "Everyone, stand ready," he said nervously. The doors opened. Two corporate representatives stepped inside first, both wearing formal suits and carrying tablets. Behind them, the store manager quickly approached with a polite smile. "Welcome to the Varela branch." But the employees noticed something strange. The CEO himself was not with them. Roderick walked forward and greeted the representatives. "Where is Mr. Viermont?" he asked. One of the representatives glanced around the store briefly. "He will be here shortly," she replied. The employees exchanged curious looks. Minutes passed. The tension inside the store continued growing. Then, something unexpected happened. From the hallway near the maintenance area, the janitor slowly walked toward the front of the store, still wearing the same gray maintenance uniform, still pushing the same cleaning cart. Orion Vale moved calmly across the floor while employees watched him with mild annoyance. Roderick frowned. "What is the janitor doing here?" he muttered. He turned toward Orion with visible irritation. "Hey, move that cart somewhere else. This area is reserved for executives today." Orion stopped walking. The corporate representatives suddenly turned their attention toward him. For a moment, the entire store fell silent. Then, something even stranger happened. Orion calmly reached up and removed the name tag from his uniform. He placed it gently on top of the cleaning cart. Then, he slowly took off the gray maintenance jacket. Underneath, He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. The room became completely silent. Employees stared at him in confusion. Roderick frowned deeply. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Orion calmly walked past the cleaning cart and stepped forward toward the center of the room. The corporate representatives immediately straightened their posture. Then, both of them bowed their heads slightly. "Good morning, Mr. Viramont." The words echoed through the store like thunder. Several employees gasped. One of the cashiers nearly dropped the tablet she was holding. Roderick's face turned completely pale. Silas Vantrell froze in place. Elric stared in disbelief. The quiet janitor they had seen cleaning floors for the past 2 weeks now stood calmly in front of them, wearing a sharp executive suit. The man they had ignored, the man they had mocked, the man they believed was nothing more than a maintenance worker, was actually Calum Viramont, the billionaire CEO of Halcyon Retail Group. For several seconds, no one spoke. The silence inside the store was so heavy, it almost felt unreal. Calum slowly looked around the room. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a quiet authority that immediately reminded everyone who he truly was. "I believe you were expecting a visit from the CEO today," he said evenly. His voice was calm, but every word felt heavy. "Well," he continued, "you've already met him." No one moved. Roderick's hands trembled slightly. Silas slowly stepped backwards, his mind racing. Employees who had once laughed at the janitor now stood frozen in shock. Calum looked directly at Roderick. Their eyes met. The supervisor who had shouted at him, mocked him, and humiliated him in front of customers now looked like a man who had just seen his entire world collapse. Because in that single moment, everyone inside the branch understood the same terrifying truth. The quiet janitor who had been cleaning their floors for 2 weeks had been watching everything. Every insult, every lie, every act of arrogance. And now, the consequences were about to begin. For several long seconds after the revelation, no one inside the Halcyon branch could move. The silence that filled the store was heavier than anything the employees had ever experienced. The bright lights above them hummed quietly, and the faint music from the speakers continued playing as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything had changed. Standing in the center of the store was Calum Viramont, the billionaire CEO of Halcyon Retail Group, the man responsible for the entire company that employed them all. Just moments earlier, they had known him only as the quiet janitor named Orion Vale. Now the truth had been revealed, and the consequences were beginning to settle into everyone's minds. Roderick Halvern's face had completely lost its color. The supervisor who once shouted across the sales floor now looked like a man struggling to breathe. Silas Vantrell, the operations manager, stood frozen near the conference room door, clutching a stack of reports that suddenly felt heavier than stone. Several employees slowly stepped backward, whispering among themselves. The corporate representatives remained silent, standing respectfully behind Calum. Finally, Calum spoke. His voice was calm and controlled, but every word carried the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "For the past 2 weeks," he said slowly, "I have been working inside this branch under the name Orion Vale. No one dared interrupt him. I cleaned the floors. I emptied the trash bins. I scrubbed the restrooms. His eyes slowly moved across the room. And during that time, I observed how this branch truly operates. A few employees lowered their heads. Others avoided looking at him completely. Calum took a few slow steps forward. "When I built this company," he said slowly, "I believed something very simple." He paused briefly. "That every person in this organization deserves respect." His gaze shifted toward the maintenance hallway behind him, whether they are executives or janitors. The words hung heavily in the air. Then his eyes turned toward Roderick. The supervisor stiffened immediately. "Mr. Halvern," Calum said calmly. "Yes, sir." Calum studied him for a moment. "Over the past 2 weeks, I witnessed several incidents involving your behavior toward employees." Roderick's hands began trembling. I can explain, sir." Calum raised a hand gently. "There is no need." He glanced briefly at one of the corporate representatives. She immediately handed him a small tablet. Calum tapped the screen once before continuing. "I have documented multiple occasions where you publicly humiliated staff members, including maintenance workers." Roderick's breathing grew shallow. "That is not the leadership culture this company stands for." The supervisor opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Calum's voice remained calm. "Effective immediately, you are removed from your position as sales supervisor." The words struck the room like a hammer. Roderick staggered slightly. "Sir, please, I didn't know." "That is precisely the problem," Calum replied quietly. "You believed you could treat people that way because you thought no one important was watching." 2 security staff members stepped forward from the entrance. Roderick lowered his head in defeat as they escorted him toward the exit. No one in the store dared speak. But Calum was not finished. He slowly turned his attention towards Silas Van Trell, the operations manager. Looked as if he had aged 10 years in the past minute. "Mr. Van Trell," Calum said. Silas forced himself to stand straighter. "Yes, sir." Calum held up the tablet. "During my time working here, I also overheard several conversations regarding inventory reports." Silas's eyes widened slightly. I don't know what you're referring to." Calum's voice remained steady. "You discussed altering sales data, marking missing products as damaged goods, and dividing unreported profits among management." The entire room froze. Silas's face turned pale. "That's not—" Calum's tone became firmer. "The conversation took place in your office 2 days ago." He tapped the screen again. "The details have already been forwarded to our legal department." Silas's hands slowly dropped to his sides. "You are also relieved of your position effective immediately." The manager looked as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. The remaining employees watched in stunned silence as security approached once again. Within minutes, 2 of the most powerful people inside the branch were escorted out of the building. The store felt strangely quiet. Calum turned back toward the employees. Some looked ashamed, others looked frightened, a few seemed close to tears. "For those of you who participated in disrespectful behavior toward your coworkers, consider today a warning." He paused. "But understand this clearly." He looked directly at them. Respect inside this company is not optional. No one argued, no one defended themselves, because they all knew something now that they had not understood before. The janitor they ignored had been watching everything, and he had seen the truth. But as Calum looked around the room one more time, his gaze finally landed on a familiar face standing quietly near the shelves. Elric Danter, the young employee who had once stood up to defend a janitor everyone else ignored. And for the first time that morning, Calum allowed a small, thoughtful expression to cross his face. Because among all the arrogance and corruption he had discovered inside this branch, one person had shown something far more valuable: integrity. After the security team escorted Roderick Halvern and Silas Van Trell out of the building, the entire Halcyon branch remained frozen in place. The employees still stood across the sales floor, trying to process everything that had just happened. Just minutes earlier, they had been nervously preparing to impress the CEO. Now they had witnessed two of their highest-ranking managers removed from their positions in front of everyone. The silence inside the store felt heavy. Calum Viramont stood calmly near the center of the floor, his presence alone enough to command the attention of every person in the building. For a moment, he simply looked around. He did see the fear in many of their faces. Some employees looked ashamed, avoiding eye contact. Others appeared nervous, unsure whether they would be the next ones called out. But Calum had already made his decisions. He slowly took a few steps forward. "I did not come here only to remove people from their positions," he said calmly. The employees listened carefully. "I came here to understand what kind of people truly work inside this company." His eyes moved across the room again. "In the past 2 weeks, I witnessed arrogance, disrespect, and dishonesty." A few employees shifted uncomfortably. "But I also witnessed something else." He paused. "Integrity." Calum turned his gaze toward the back of the sales floor. Standing quietly beside a shelf was Elric Dantor. The young employee had remained silent throughout the entire scene. He looked slightly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. When Calum called his name, the young man straightened immediately. "Elric Dantor?" He looked surprised. "Yes, sir?" Calum walked slowly toward him. As the CEO approached, several employees nearby stepped aside, creating a clear path across the aisle. Elric stood still, unsure what was about to happen. Calum stopped in front of him. "For the past 2 weeks," Calum said, "you believed I was a janitor." Elric nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. And during that time, you chose to treat me with respect." Elric looked slightly embarrassed. "I was just doing what anyone should do." Calum studied him carefully. "That is exactly the point." He turned slightly so the rest of the employees could hear. "Respect should not depend on someone's job title." Several employees lowered their heads again. Calum looked back at Elric. "When your supervisor blamed me for something that was not my fault, you defended me." Elric hesitated before speaking. "I just thought it wasn't right." Calum nodded slowly. "Most people in this building stayed silent because they were afraid." He glanced briefly across the store. "But you spoke up." Elric shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. "I didn't expect anything from it," he said honestly. "I know." Calum allowed a small approving expression to appear, and that is why it matters. The CEO turned back toward the rest of the staff. One of them stepped forward and handed him a document. Calum looked back at Elric. "Starting today, The position of interim operations supervisor for this branch will be given to you." The words stunned the entire store. Several employees gasped quietly. Elric's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, I think there must be some mistake." Calum shook his head. "There is no mistake." Elric looked overwhelmed. "But I've never managed people before." Calum replied calmly, "Leadership is not about experience alone." He paused briefly. "It is about character." Elric turned his gaze down toward the floor for a moment, clearly trying to process the situation. "I'm just a regular employee," he said quietly. Calum nodded. "That is exactly why I trust you." The room remained silent as everyone watched the exchange. Calum continued speaking. "This branch needs someone who understands respect, responsibility, and honesty." He looked directly at Elric. "And during the time I worked here, you demonstrated all three." Elric lifted his head slowly. "What if I fail?" Calum answered without hesitation. "Then you will learn." The words carried a calm confidence that immediately eased the tension. After a long moment, Elric finally nodded. "I'll do my best, sir." Calum extended his hand. Elric hesitated briefly before shaking it. The handshake was simple, but everyone watching understood the significance of that moment. A young employee who once stood up for a janitor had just been entrusted with the leadership of the entire branch. Calum turned back toward the rest of the staff. "I expect this branch to operate with a new standard from today forward." His voice remained calm but firm. "No employee should ever be treated as invisible again." He looked briefly at the maintenance equipment near the wall. "The people who clean the floors, carry the boxes, and assist customers are just as important as those who sit in offices." Several employees nodded quietly, because they had finally realized something important. The quiet janitor they once ignored had seen everything, and his judgment had already reshaped the future of the entire branch. But Calum knew the real work had only just begun, because rebuilding a company's culture required more than removing a few bad leaders. It required changing the way people treated one another every single day. In the weeks that followed the shocking revelation at the Halcyon branch in Varela, the atmosphere inside the store slowly began to change. At first, many employees still felt uneasy whenever they remembered what had happened. The moment when the quiet janitor had revealed himself as Calum Viramont, the billionaire CEO of the entire company, remained fresh in everyone's mind. It had forced every employee in that building to reflect on their own behavior. The first changes came quickly. Corporate headquarters sent a team of auditors to examine the financial records of the branch. The manipulated reports that Silas Van Trell and his management group had been hiding were uncovered within days. The investigation confirmed everything Calum had suspected during his time working undercover. The stolen inventory, the falsified records, and the hidden profits were all documented and forwarded to the legal department. For the employees who had quietly witnessed those irregularities but were too afraid to speak up, the investigation felt like long overdue justice. But the bigger transformation inside the branch did not come from punishment. It came from leadership. Elric Dantor stepped into his new role as interim operations supervisor with a quiet determination. The first few days were not easy for him. Some employees were unsure how to react to someone who had once worked beside them, now managing the entire branch. But Elric approached the job in the same way he had always approached his work, with humility. Instead of issuing harsh orders, he began by speaking with every department one by one. He listened to their concerns, asked questions about their daily routines, and encouraged them to be honest about the problems inside the store. Many employees were surprised by his approach. They had grown used to supervisors like Roderick Halvern, who ruled through intimidation and criticism. Elric's leadership style felt completely different. One morning, he gathered the staff near the center of the sales floor before the store opened. "I know things have been difficult here," he said calmly. The employees listened quietly. "But we have a chance to start over." He looked around at the group. "This branch doesn't need perfect employees." He paused briefly. "It just needs people who respect each other." Those words spread quickly throughout the team. The small, everyday habits inside the store began to change. Employees started helping each other more often. Sales associates began responding to customers faster instead of ignoring them. Even the way people spoke to the maintenance staff slowly improved. For the first time in a long time, the branch started to feel less like a workplace filled with tension and more like a team working toward the same goal. A few weeks later, Calum Veramont returned to the Varela branch once again. This time, he arrived through the front entrance wearing his usual business suit. There was no disguise, no hidden identity. The employees greeted him with genuine respect. But what caught his attention was something else. Near the entrance, one of the sales associates accidentally dropped a box of packaging materials onto the floor. The contents scattered across the tiles. Before the janitor could even move, two nearby employees immediately stepped forward to help pick up the mess. They didn't laugh, they didn't call for someone else to clean it, they simply helped. Calum watched the scene quietly. It was a small moment, but it told him everything he needed to know. Inside the manager's office, Elric was reviewing the day's inventory report when Calum entered the room. The young supervisor quickly stood. "Good afternoon, sir." Calum nodded slightly. "How is the branch doing?" Elric handed him the report. "Sales are improving. Customer complaints have dropped significantly over the past 3 weeks." Calum scanned the numbers briefly. "Good." Elric hesitated before speaking again. "I'm still learning how to handle everything," he admitted. Calum placed the report down on the desk. "That's part of leadership." He looked around the office. "When I started this company, I made many mistakes." Elric looked surprised. "You did?" Calum allowed a faint smile. "Of course." He walked toward the window overlooking the sales floor. "But the most important lesson I learned was this." He turned slightly toward Elric. "A company is not built by profits alone." Elric listened carefully. "It is built by the way people treat one another." The young supervisor nodded slowly. Outside the office window, employees continued working across the store floor. Customers browsed through the aisles while staff members assisted them with genuine attention. The atmosphere felt different now, healthier, calmer. Calum looked across the store one last time. Weeks earlier, this branch had been filled with arrogance, disrespect, and corruption. But now it was becoming something else entirely. A workplace where people were beginning to understand the value of respect and responsibility. Before leaving the office, Calum placed a hand briefly on Elric's shoulder. "You're doing well." Elric nodded with quiet determination. "I'll keep trying, sir." As Calum walked back toward the entrance of the store, he passed the same hallway where he once pushed a janitor's cleaning cart. For a moment, he paused, not because he regretted the experience, but because it had reminded him of something important. The true strength of a company was not measured by the wealth of its CEO. It was measured by the character of the people who worked within it. And sometimes, the best way to understand that character was to walk among them unnoticed, even if it meant becoming the janitor no one bothered to see.